Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. India may have reduced extreme poverty far more effectively than most of us are aware of. The last official data is 8 years old. In 2011, 268 million people were surviving on less than $1.9 a day, the World Bank measure for extreme poverty. The next round of data on household consumption is likely to come out in June, and it may well show a drastic drop in the number of poor. According to the World Data Lab, which monitors global poverty using advanced statistical models, less than 50 million Indians may be living on less than $1.9 a day now. Economists said rapid economic growth and the use of technology for social sector programs have helped make a significant dent in extreme poverty in the country. The BJP on Monday cited global think tank reports to say that India is moving fast towards a poverty-free situation and gave credit to policies of the Narendra Modi-led government for it. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what more needs to be done to eradicate poverty. Joining me on the program today are Abhinav Prakash, Assistant Professor, Delhi University, K. Badrinath, Editor-in-Chief of the Financial Chronicle, and Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Dua, let me begin the program with you. How far have we come in our fight against poverty?
Against absolute penury, I think we've done fairly well. The last official data which you quoted did talk about 22% of Indians at that point of time living below the poverty line. I'm sure there has been progress since then, because it's been 8 years, as you mentioned, 7 to 8 years, and the number would have come down considerably. But I'm not too sure whether the number would be as low as 50 million from what we at that point of time, 268 million population growth since then. In the last 8 years, at least a growth of 25% growth, even at 2% compounded rate of growth. I would think that number may be closer to 150 to 200 million between that and not less than that. But having said that, I think each government, particularly after 1991, has seen during its tenure the number of people in absolute abject poverty coming down. But in absolute number, we continue to have a large population of ours which is certainly not able to afford whichever poverty line you base yourself on, based on income or based on consumption, and not only calorific value, but all kinds of other things, the sophisticated models which you talked about. So we do have a long way to go.
Right.
And I would think that the incidence of poverty, extreme poverty, continues to be much higher in rural areas than in the urban areas. The urban areas are not immune from it. If you see people living in pipes in Mumbai and other places, and living in slums. And at the same time, in the rural areas, the number of people in poverty or below poverty is much higher, where the irrigation facilities are lacking. So arid, dry lands, those areas are seeing much more poverty.
Right. Abhinav Prakash, what steps have consecutive governments taken so as to ensure that we are here today? It's definitely a significant improvement. Like Mr. Dua has said, a lot more needs to be done. We'll talk about what more needs to be done later on in our segment, later on in the program. But let's first try and understand what has been done thus far.
See, we see this fall in the poverty basically after the economic reforms were undertaken. And that proves something very basic, which people have been saying over the years, that poverty eradication should not be the goal of the government policy. The goal of the government policy should be to create prosperity. It's only by creating prosperity can you reduce the poverty. So after the economic reforms, our economy has been growing at a faster rate than before, and that is the first condition to reduce the poverty. Without the high economic growth rate, you just can't reduce the poverty, right? And coupled with that economic growth, the governments have been also undertaking various programs like employment generation program, income support employment guarantee, providing provision of utilities, housing, and all those things. Those basically eases the financial expenditure of the poor households. The most important thing which people do often miss is that how much the expenditure on the utilities by the government to provide to these poor household reduces the poverty. Like electricity is one. The moment you start providing electricity to every household, various reports, various research says that poverty comes down drastically in those households. Second one is housing. So all this Indira Awas Yojana or the recent Pradhan Mantri Jan Awas Yojana, these the providing the pakka house to people and the utilities to the people, like toilet construction, right? The Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, by simply constructing a toilet in every household, you have almost saved more than 50,000 rupees per year per household, because the incidence of diseases go down, extra expenditure goes down, and so many things. But the real thing which works is, you know, the expenditure on the agriculture, because majority of our people depend on agriculture, and as we have just listened, that majority of the people, the poor people, depend still on the agriculture in the village area. So the moment you start pumping in money in the agricultural sector or in the rural sector, like Manrega was one, it was a successful policy more or less, you directly bring down the poverty rates in the country. So I think it's a combination of various things, right? Provision of utilities, the housing, electricity, skill development, promotion of microcredit, self-help groups, provision of banking account and formal credit. There's a positive synergy which is being created that is driving the poverty down. Also, we have recently crossed our per capita GDP is almost $2,000, right, per person. That is a kind of an inflection point throughout the world. The moment you cross this mark, suddenly we have seen that poverty declines drastically. The China experienced this. They crossed this mark, I think, in early 2000, and since then their poverty rates have been simply going down, because from that point the economy simply starts booming,
right,
by a self-sustaining
So that's
circle.
the threshold basically that we've reached. Yeah.
More income, more expenditure, economy goes on booming and booming, and the high economic growth rate, I will say, is the first condition. Without that, nothing happens.
Sure. Badrinath, what has worked really in our fight against poverty?
See, there are two ways of looking at the issue. One is the way we are talking about either 155 rupees or 125 rupees. The World Bank's last survey said that if it is $1.25, that means you are not below poverty line. And now we are talking about 155 rupees or $1.9. Now, there are two issues there. One is, what was the conversion ratio then? And what is the conversion ratio now? Second is, what do you mean by $1.25? Do you take the same yardstick globally for saying that he is not below poverty line? So, there is a big question mark as to what do you consider as being above the poverty line. Having said that, there is no denying that successive governments have done a lot. But only thing is, the strategy could have been little different. In the sense, it's not that UPA has not attacked poverty at all. UPA governments did attack poverty. Well, it was more of a welfare state, you wanted that, and more of entitlement, more you wanted to live on subsidies and all that. Here, what this government seems to be trying out is more kind of a empowerment kind of a thing. You empower the guy or the family so that he or she finds the wherewithal to earn his living, and honorably at that, without seeking jobs or without. I'm not saying that it's a all-round runaway success, but a distinct difference has been made from entitlement to empowerment.
Right.
But in this entire case, the 10% reservation that you have brought in seems to be defeating this strategy that you have followed till date on empowering the people for getting out of the poverty. So this seems to be a key issue, defining issue when we look at poverty figures, what defines poverty, how do we go forward, and all those issues.
Absolutely right. You know, there was a recent report, Mr. Dua, which suggested that the rich in the country are only getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. 1% of India's, rich have most of the wealth, is what that report went on to suggest. So how do we address that kind of a problem?
I think something which needs to be addressed forthwith is that issue. Let's not get carried away by per capita income threshold of $2,000. Yes, on an average, in terms of rupees, it's 1,38,000 is the per capita income. So if you take it as 70 multiplied by 1,000 and multiplied by 2, but in the average per capita income within the states varies so widely. Bihar is the lowest at 38,000, which means 3,200 rupees per month. And that, in terms of dollars, it is $60, not even 60, it's less than $50. So 50 into 12 is $600, while the country's average, we're talking of $2,000. And absolutely, in terms of income, yes, huge disparity. In terms of wealth, even more. The fact of the matter is, we have, as a government, we have to show the will to tax the people, the rich people, much more than we do. Yes, there would be complaints, there would be grievances saying not enough is being left for investment, how does the economy build up, etc. All that is understandable. But you need to now also start taxing wealth, not merely income. Estate duties, etc. All those things have to come in if we have to be able to fund amelioration of the poor in the states. And when I say this, I would just emphasize two things. One, absolutely a must for the state to start investing much more in the rural areas, state meaning the government, center and the states, particularly investment in agriculture, which will increase productivity.
Right.
Today, the government expenditure in subsidies to the farm sector is 5 times what the government invests in agriculture. Government per se. I think that the need is to go the other way around, because subsidies are palliatives. These are addressing short-term issues. Interest subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, power subsidy, all those kinds of things. Whereas what you have to be doing is, let me invest more in power. People pay for it, availability of power. Let me put more money in distribution of electricity, distribution of water, all those kind of things, plus in R&D for agriculture, which will, an appreciable difference would only be made when the government takes away much more from the rich, from the corporate sector, than it is able to do today. That's number one.
Right.
And second, let's not forget, though I did say that the number of poor in the urban areas is less. Yes, it may be less compared to rural, but there is urban poverty as well. People leave villages when the fragmentation reduces their holding size, is not enough to support, all thinking that the bright lights of the city attract them. But once they reach the cities, they look at it, they are neither in the rural areas, not able to go back, even though there is some emotional security of living together. But
the lights are not so bright anymore.
The lights are not so bright. Only the probability of survival probably is a little higher. But actually, when they look at it, it's a very tough life. So poverty there has also to be addressed.
Right.
And there, these concepts like UBI, which is not possible when you talk UBI per se, but a higher subsidy for direct income transfer to the poor, which is being talked about, etc. All these things will address this issue of abject poverty to some extent.
Right. Is that the answer really to the problem? Direct cash transfer, UBI, Sikkim is heading that way. They already implemented UBI.
Not really UBI. UBI means irrespective of your income,
right,
you will get a government grant, irrespective of your location. I am saying needy. Not the subsidies today which you give in the farm, if I might just say, to the rich. Those need not be there.
Sure. Sure.
Whether it is a subsidy on fertilizer, food subsidy, fuel subsidy, those need not be there for the rich. Those subsidies, because you have to phase them out all over time. First, from the somebody holding, say, above 10 acres of land and addressing the lower. In course of time, when the irrigation, power, and other roads, etc., become better, even from the lower ones, and only then looking at the people who have no other income are being subsidized.
Sure, Abhinav Prakash.
Well, I partially agree what he has just said. I don't think we need to tax more because we are already a very high tax economy, especially our corporate taxes are really very high. Especially when America and everyone is cutting down taxes, we just can't do that. But I agree to the point that the main cause of inequality is the wealth inequality. And perhaps we can think and we should think about taxing the wealth because that is something which simply escapes from the tax net. However, I do not think that providing universal basic income or income support to everyone is feasible. But I think we should start by providing income support to the farmers, at least, because the argument is also the poverty reduction, but the argument is also the very fact that sustainability and survivability of these people. And also in the urban areas, when you have the disruption in the jobs market, the job security can no longer be guaranteed by the state. You really need to provide some income security to the people or the security of the social services. And here this is the very important point out here, that for driving the poverty, you really need to invest in the public infrastructure. The cost of living has to go down. The transportation cost has to go down. The housing cost has to go down, right? A person who comes to Delhi, if he wants to buy a house, he is spending basically 10 years of his income, which basically pushes him to a lower income bracket. Suppose you were not supposed to.
And Mumbai is a different ball game altogether.
Mumbai is a different ball game altogether.
You pay that much to get a place in a slum.
Yeah, right.
Squatter settlement.
So the moment you reform your real estate market, the housing market, that your rents go down, your transportation costs go down, your cost of living goes down, automatically you will see the improvement across the board, not just for the poor people, but even for the middle class and the lower middle class. This is something which China has done. The Chinese have invested heavily in the housing and electricity and the utilities, which brings the cost down for the people. And this is something we often miss in our debates on the poverty reduction. And these public infrastructure matters most for the poorest of the poor. Maybe the rich can buy and they can get the water tankers if they want to, but the poor can't do that.
Right.
So we really need to focus on the public infrastructure. Second point, what I'm going to see, what I'm seeing and what we are going to see in the coming years, the poverty rates are really going to decline even faster. Because see, we have done something which is very, very important in the last year, which is Ayushman Bharat. The health expenditure was the single largest out-of-the-pocket expenditure for the poor household. And it was a single greatest reason for the people falling back into the poverty line. You came out of the poverty line, the moment you fall sick, you have to go to the hospital, get an operation done, you're back to the square one. With Ayushman Bharat, I'm pretty sure in a couple of years from now, we will see the impact on the poverty reduction a lot.
Sure. K. Badrinath, as far as...
I have a slightly
different take. Okay.
The UBI was earlier proposed by Niti Aayog and when Arvind Subramaniam was there. And after that, the finance minister had rejected that move, saying that I cannot fund it. Though I want to do it, I want to make it as inclusive as possible, the growth story. But the point is, universal basic income scheme may not be implementable at all in the given circumstances. I don't have the resources or the wherewithal to do that.
This was in 2017.
Yes. Number two. Now, will you take in this backdrop, you see the loan waivers that we have tried out in different states. The loan waivers have not worked either it was announced by BJP or the Congress governments. And for example, the best standing example is Rajasthan. The Vasundhara Raje government tried to implement a loan waiver partially. And then after that what happened? They could only muster about 4,000-5,000 crores and then they gave up. And now the new government comes in, or the Ashok Gehlot government comes in, and he says 17,000 crores worth of loan waivers I will make. I mean, these are all unworkable propositions. Now, in this backdrop comes another big bomb. says that, okay, I will allow a minimum income guarantee. How do you do that? How can you bring in a minimum income guarantee without putting the structures in place? Neither do you have created the opportunity, nor do you have enough in the existing market, nor do you have government jobs, nor do you have public sector jobs, nor you can do your own work. So, if this is the case, neither minimum income guarantee is possible, nor is the loan waivers possible, and in a very restricted way, perhaps universal basic income scheme may be possible if we have a big cutoff limit.
But it's not going to be universal anymore then.
Yes, exactly.
There is nothing universal about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
And that's why yesterday Arvind Subramaniam says it is quasi basic income scheme.
Sure.
So, in this, you are left with very little option.
Yeah. You need to have everything else in place if you have to go ahead with schemes like this, is what the panelists are suggesting. Okay, looking forward, Mr. Dua, what are the biggest challenges facing poverty eradication?
Not enough production coming out of land. Not enough other economic activity in rural areas. I think these two factors are accentuating the plight of the rural people.
But would it be the right thing to do to concentrate so much on agriculture when agriculture's share in the GDP has only been diminishing?
No, absolutely. The fact of the matter is, if your population, if your 60% of the population or 65% still continues to live in rural areas, you don't want them to be moving to urban areas because there are other options. Unemployment issues, etc., are probably more severe in the organized sector there.
Sorry to interrupt, but shouldn't we be focusing on education and skill development and so on and so on?
Absolutely. But keep them in rural areas where they are, promote public health, promote education, promote the infrastructure of roads so that marketability, etc., increases and jobs get created in rural areas. Automatically, the pressure on land would reduce. But we have reached a stage where unless just giving better seeds or fertilizers is not enough, you have to be able to address this issue that 2/3 of your land in the country is still rain fed.
Right.
You have to get more out of agriculture, and that's where agriculture inputs by way of irrigation comes in. Like in public health, we need to invest much more so that human productivity increases. Education, we need to invest more so that their employability, self-entrepreneurship, etc. increases. I would emphasize getting more out of land. The prerequisite is making it more less monsoon dependent and much more on the on canals and wells and percolation tanks, etc.
All right. Abhinav Prakash, what more needs to be done going forward?
I think we need to focus more on promoting economic growth rate. The more you have the economic growth rate, the poverty will go down. Plus, couple that with the creation of a very strong social security net. Third, by creating public infrastructure in the basic utilities, which we are already doing, electrification, housing, transportation and everything, and also building the next generation infrastructure. You know, it's a matter of shame that in India, you have only 1,500 kilometers of expressway. China has more than 100,000. America also has around 100,000. And there's a direct relation between the expressways and the infrastructure with economic activities on the ground. And nothing reduces the poverty like economic production and participation in the economic production. So you have to stimulate the economic production, economic growth, plus create a social security network, plus empower your people, make them skilled and able to participate in these new economic opportunities.
Sure.
If you are able to create this synergy, I'm pretty sure we can eradicate extreme poverty in the next decade itself.
All right. Going forward, K. Badrinath, can we have a scheme which is like, you know, one size fits all, or do we need specific schemes for different sectors?
I have the view that everything will not be possible for everybody. And one scheme cannot be for there, like universal income scheme may not be the way out at all. But my guess is empowerment is a better strategy than going in for entitlements, number one. Then second, building support structures for such a thing is the second point on which perhaps the new policy or new government should look at. Third part is creating social and economic infrastructure to support such a project. Fourth is linking the people. Most of the people who are not linked with the markets have to be linked with the market, whether it is farmers, the businessmen, or the service providers, or even self-employed people need to be linked with the market. Unless these 3-4 things are not done, perhaps we don't see a way out. In fact, Mr. Dua Sahab was more generous when he said 150-200 million. But most of our numbers that we provide to the WTO is about 660 million. So, point here is, where are we? One is a realistic, assessment. We need to know as to where we are. Second, let's not just depend on World Bank or Data Bank or something like that. I don't think that needs to be there. We have enough intellectual bandwidth to understand what we are
and where we stand.
So
let's focus on.
We need to move.
Absolutely. All right. With that, then, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.